The emergency alerts hit my phone one after another: contract freezes, investor withdrawals, legal risk escalations. Every notification tied directly to the CEO's son's $90 million expansion project. 2 nights earlier, he had leaned back in the boardroom and smirked at me, telling me to stick to your little side tasks. His father agreed without hesitation. I kept my eyes on my notepad, wrote what they needed me to write, and when the meeting ended, I sent a single message to my investment director: pull all funding, immediately. I never expected the fallout to spread this far, or for the truth about who held the real power to land with such force. The story you're about to hear is a fictional work created by the writing team at Revengeaita. It draws inspiration from the injustices many women face in the workplace: disrespect, favoritism, and age bias against midlife professionals. We tell this story to highlight the journey of a woman who rises, reclaims her worth, and refuses to let anyone define her value. This narrative is meant to inspire, heal, and remind you that self-respect is never something you ask permission for. All characters and events are purely illustrative. My name is Sophia Kerrigan, and when the alerts started flooding in, I was sitting alone in my apartment in Seattle, staring at a phone that would not stop shaking. Elias Monroe, my investment director, called first. He never called unless something had truly gone off the rails. Sophia. The partners in Singapore froze the land contracts, he said, voice tight. They are demanding an explanation for the missing capital. Let them hold, I replied. They deserve answers from the people who ignored every warning sign. Another alert buzzed: internal audit escalation, then a partner withdrawal, then a construction delay. Rainford Technologies had been shoved off balance in less than 15 minutes, and it all traced back to the message I sent. I should have felt fear or regret, but all I felt was clarity. This collapse was not a surprise. It was a consequence. A final alert appeared: emergency board meeting called for the morning. I set the phone on the table and exhaled, steadying myself. They would come looking for explanations, blame, someone to pin this chaos on. They had no idea the person they dismissed as support staff had been underwriting their entire dream. 48 hours earlier, none of this had begun yet. Not the panic, not the unraveling, just a boardroom, a presentation, and a man who believed arrogance was the same thing as leadership. And that was where everything truly started. Brandon Rainford stood at the head of the long conference table, as if it had been built just for him. The Asia Gateway expansion is our boldest move yet, he declared, clicking through slides filled with projections and animated graphs. By next quarter, we will have secured 3 distributor partnerships, final land agreements, and a launch roadmap worth $90 million. His father, Richard Rainford, nodded before the board could respond. Outstanding work, Brandon. This is the kind of thinking Rainford Technologies needs: vision, confidence. I kept typing, the keys soft beneath my fingers, the rhythm steady. They liked me steady. They liked me silent. Brandon pointed his remote at the screen. This is leadership, not paperwork. Real momentum. Real business. I shifted slightly in my chair. Brandon, can you walk us through the revised contingency framework for the accelerated timeline? The risk profile changes if the land approval is delayed. He didn't look at me, he laughed. A short, dismissive sound that bounced off the glass walls. Contingency. He leaned forward. Sophia, this is not one of your administrative checklists. This is a high-level expansion. You do great work. But these decisions are for people with operational experience, his father added. Management belongs to real professionals. Sophia, let Brandon handle the heavy lifting. My pen paused for half a second. Then I kept writing, documenting their words as if they were harmless. Across the table, CFO Daniel Huxley shifted in his seat. He offered a quick glance, sharp, knowing, a flicker of something like concern. Or understanding. Or both. Brandon continued, swaggering through his deck. Once the initial $30 million is released, everything falls into place. The rest is just execution. Daniel cleared his throat, trying to interject. We still need confirmation from Brandon. Cut him off. I already said it's handled. I typed those words too. Word for word. When the meeting adjourned, Brandon slapped his father on the back and basked in the praise. The board filed out, murmuring polite approval. Daniel lingered. As I gathered my notebook, he approached quietly. You asked the right question, he said under his breath. They won't admit it, but you were the only one in that room thinking about consequences. I held his gaze for a moment, unsure whether he meant it as a warning or an encouragement. Either way, it stayed with me long after I left the room. The hallway outside the boardroom was quiet, but my pulse wasn't. I walked until I reached an empty alcove near the stairwell, pulled out my phone, and opened the encrypted channel Elias Monroe and I used for sensitive communication. He answered on the second ring. "Sophia, you only call during business hours when something is wrong. Brandon just announced the Asia Gateway timeline is accelerating," I said. "He claims the first $30 million will be released next week." A long exhale crackled through the speaker. He did what he presented it, as if the investor consortium approved everything. "That would be impressive," Elias said dryly. "Considering the consortium is almost entirely you." I pressed my back against the wall. "Give me the breakdown again." "Out of the $90 million they believe they secured, you control $76 million, he said. "The remaining $14 million is split among two minor partners whose involvement depends on your continued participation. If you step out, they follow." My fingers tightened around the phone. "So the entire structure collapses without my capital?" "Yes. Rainford Technologies has no expansion without you. That was the point of the shell setup. Remember, you wanted to evaluate Brandon's competence without interference." "I wanted to give him a fair chance," I murmured. "I wanted to see whether he could run a project without leaning on his last name." "Well," Elias said quietly, "he just violated two clauses. Timeline acceleration requires investor consent. He offered guarantees he had no authority to make." I closed my eyes. "Omission or arrogance?" "Both," Elias replied. "And now he is counting on money he does not have." A door slammed down the hall. Brandon's voice echoed as he laughed with someone, still riding the high of his performance. Elias lowered his tone. "Sophia, we drafted those clauses for your protection. If he pushes ahead like this, he puts your capital at direct risk. He thinks I am a note-taker," I said. "Someone who keeps track of his ideas." Elias didn't argue. He didn't need to. He knew exactly what I had built over the last 12 years, every investment, every acquisition, every sleepless night where I balanced risk, while the Rainfords congratulated themselves for momentum I quietly funded. "Tell me what you want to do," he said. I didn't speak yet. I listened to Brandon's laughter fade, rolling through the corridor like a promise he would never keep. The weight of the decision settled in, heavy and deliberate. By the afternoon, Brandon had gathered a small group in the open workspace, his voice carrying farther than it needed to. "The analysis in last week's report was mine," he boasted, lifting the printed packet I had spent 3 nights perfecting. "It took a lot of strategy work to land those projections." One of the senior managers nodded. "Impressive, sharp detail." I stepped past them with my laptop pressed to my side. Brandon didn't so much as glance at me. He just kept talking. "I mean, Sophia assisted with formatting, but the insights, that was me." My breath caught, but I didn't stop walking. I slipped around the corner toward the elevator, only to hear 2 employees near the break room whispering. "She's good for admin work," one murmured. "Organized, reliable. Brandon's lucky to have someone like that behind the scenes." "Yeah," the other replied. "Not everyone is cut out for leadership." The words landed harder than either of them intended. Behind the scenes, I had heard that before. A memory surfaced me sitting across from Richard Rainford during a review last year. I had asked for consideration for a strategy director role. He folded his hands, smiling like he was offering kindness. "Sophia, you are exceptional," he'd said. "But you thrive best behind the scenes. You make other people shine. That is a rare gift. Brandon needs people like you." That same warmth had felt like a door closing. Back in the present, I pressed the elevator button twice, harder than necessary. Brandon, inside his circle of admirers, believed he had built this expansion with sheer vision. He had no idea he was standing on capital I had quietly assembled over 12 years, capital he had just endangered without hesitation. The elevator arrived with a muted chime. I stepped inside and let the doors slide shut. The line between loyalty and self-respect had thinned to nothing. I closed the office door behind me and called Elias again. His voice came through immediately, steady but tense. "Sophia, I pulled the contracts. If you withdraw, Rainford Technologies faces immediate penalties. The partners in Singapore will activate breach clauses by day 3. Construction vendors will suspend agreements within hours. I opened the file on my screen and scrolled to the sections he mentioned. Clause 14 requires investor approval for any change to the construction timeline. I said. Brandon accelerated the timeline without notifying us. He did it twice, Elias replied. Once when he moved the land deposit forward. Once when he promised the distributors an early delivery window. Both are violations. You have the legal right to step out. I know, I whispered. He hesitated. There will be fallout. They built everything on the assumption your capital was guaranteed. I leaned back in my chair, hands tight around the armrests. Elias, I have spent years watching them treat me like a background function. They praise Brandon for work he did not do. They tell me my place is behind the scenes, and he is gambling with money he does not even know is mine. I understand, Elias said quietly. I stared at the clause again. It was clear. The line they crossed was not small, it was deliberate, reckless, and signed with the confidence of men who believed no one would ever hold them accountable. My voice came out softer than I expected, but steady. Pull all funding, immediately. There was no reaction at first, just silence, thick and final. Then Elias spoke. You realize this will expose everything? Yes, I said. Every shell company, every capital trail. I know. And your role as the backbone of the entire expansion. That too. A long pause stretched between us. Then he said, very well. I will initiate the withdrawal. I ended the call, my hand still wrapped around the phone, the words echoing back through me. The truth was no longer contained. It was already moving, already loosening the first stones in the wall Brandon had built around his illusion of control. The first alert came just after 9. I was still at my dining table, laptop open, contract reviews scattered around me. The notification pulsed across the screen, transaction freeze initiated by Singapore Property Group. A second alert followed almost immediately, Manila Logistics Consortium requesting confirmation of missing capital. Then a third, Rainford Technologies legal team, urgent escalation required. My phone vibrated with each one, the rhythm turning frantic. I opened the messages, reading line after line of red text. Every system that touched the Asia Gateway expansion was reacting like a nerve struck too hard. The next vibration wasn't an alert, it was a call. Brandon. I let it ring, then silenced it. A moment later, he called again. I answered on the third attempt. Sophia, he said, breathless. Something's wrong with the funding channels. The distributors are panicking. The property group claims the capital never arrived. This has to be a system glitch. It is not a glitch, I said. Well, then someone needs to fix it. Everything is freezing at once. His voice shook. Can you connect with the investor consortium? They trust you more than they trust my team. I swallowed, the sharpness rising in my chest. They do. Yes. You always handle the admin coordination. Just tell them we need a few days. Brandon, I replied, calm but cold. The investors did not approve the accelerated timeline. He paused. What does that have to do with anything? Before I could answer. Another alert appeared on my laptop. Rainford Technologies internal audit high-risk breach flagged. Brandon's voice rose. Why is this happening? You know how crucial this expansion is. Someone acted without verifying their authority, I said. Are you implying a new message lit my screen? Withdrawal confirmed, capital removed. I closed my eyes briefly. The process was complete. Brandon kept talking, louder and more disoriented. Tell the investors I will fix everything. I just need time. He still had no idea he was speaking to the investor who pulled $76 million out from under him. I will speak with them, I said. You promise? I promise to handle what is mine to handle. He exhaled in relief, unaware of the meaning already hanging between my words. When I ended the call, the alerts kept coming, each one more urgent than the last. I watched them blink against the windows of my apartment, reflected in the dark water of Lake Union below. The collapse had begun, and Brandon was running blind toward the edge. The conference room was already full when I arrived just after dawn. Brandon stood at the front, pacing, papers scattered in a frantic arc around him. His father sat rigidly at the head of the table, jaw clenched. Brandon launched into his explanation the moment I took my seat. The foreign investors panicked, he said sharply. Singapore overreacted. Manila followed. Weak partners, all of them. CFO Daniel Huxley cleared his throat. Brandon, the partners are not weak. They are responding to missing capital. We need clarity on the investor structure. We had clarity, Brandon snapped. The consortium confirmed Daniel cut in. We never saw the contracts. We need exact ownership details, or we cannot assess liability. Richard Rainford turned to me. Sophia, you coordinated the investor communication. Pull it up. The room quieted. Dozens of eyes shifted toward me. Very well, I said. I stood, connected my laptop to the projector, and opened the funding architecture. A soft gasp rippled across the table as the layered shell companies appeared, each one leading back to an entity under my control. This, I began, is the consortium Rainford Technologies believed it secured. Brandon frowned. Those holding companies were vetted. They were, I agreed. And they all trace back to a private capital network I built over 12 years. Silence. I clicked to the next page, highlighting the clauses Brandon had violated. The timeline acceleration required investor approval. It was denied. Yet commitments were made. Guarantees were issued. Contracts were signed without authority. Richard's complexion shifted from red to ashen. Sophia, what are you saying that Rainford Technologies relied on $76 million of my funding? Not foreign investors. Mine. Brandon stared at the screen. Then at me. You, his voice cracked. You are the investor. Yes, I said. He sank back a step, confusion and disbelief fighting for space across his face. The boardroom stayed frozen, the projection glowing behind me, the truth laid bare. Every assumption overturned. The collapse of his empire had come from a place he had never bothered to look. Brandon lurched toward the table, finger pointed at me like an accusation he had been holding in for years. You sabotaged me, he said, voice shaking. You waited until everything was in motion. Then you pulled the rug out from under the entire company. I closed my laptop slowly. I submitted risk analyses in April, June, and again in September. All three reports warned that accelerating the timeline without investor approval created exposure. I slid the printed summaries across the table. You ignored every one of them. He glanced at the documents without touching them. You buried me with legal traps. You set this up. I set up nothing, I said. You were responsible for due diligence. You signed contracts without verifying authority. You gambled with $90 million, most of it mine, and treated approval requirements as optional. Richard Rainford leaned forward, gripping the edge of the table. Sophia, enough. Restore the funding. The company cannot absorb these penalties. I am not required to restore anything, I replied. The clauses are binding. Investor consent was violated. My withdrawal is lawful and final. You will undo this, Richard demanded. I will not, I said. A low murmur filled the room. Daniel, the CFO, lifted his binder. Brandon, did you notify compliance before signing the distributor guarantees? Yes, Brandon snapped. Of course I did, before Daniel could respond. The lead internal auditor stepped into the room with a tablet in hand. We completed an overnight review, she said. Brandon bypassed 3 mandatory compliance checkpoints. He pushed approvals through an outdated workflow that had been deactivated last year. Brandon's face drained. That system still worked. It did not, she replied. Your actions concealed the violations from audit logs. Richard whipped his head toward his son. You told me everything was approved. It should have been, Brandon whispered. I thought no. I interrupted. You assumed. And you assumed because no one ever told you no. The room fell silent. The weight of the truth settled in heavy, undeniable. And spreading across every corner of the table, the excuses had run out. There was nowhere left for him to stand. The board recessed for 10 minutes, though no one left the room. Conversations broke into sharp whispers while Brandon stood alone near the window, staring at the skyline as if it could offer him a way out. When Richard finally called the meeting back to order, his voice had thinned. We need to vote on corrective action, Daniel read from a prepared list, based on the violations, the unauthorized commitments, and the exposure created. The proposal is as follows. Brandon Rainford will retain title but lose all authority over corporate funds, vendor negotiations, and expansion strategy. Operational control will shift to a new oversight division. Brandon spun around. You cannot strip my authority. I am the successor. Richard pinched the bridge of his nose. This company cannot survive another mistake of this scale. The vote happened quickly. One by one, hands lifted. Only Brandon kept his down, trembling with anger he could no longer disguise. It passes, Richard said quietly. Brandon's voice cracked. You are making me a puppet. No, I said. You made yourself one the moment you stopped listening. A silence settled over the room. Then Daniel stood again. We also propose establishing a chief risk steward role, someone who oversees all high-value projects to prevent this level of oversight failure. Richard looked at me, eyes clouded with something like shame. Sophia, the board would like you to take that position. Brandon let out a disbelieving laugh. You would put her above me. She has been above you for a long time, Daniel replied. Richard straightened, facing me fully. I underestimated you, for years. I see that now. If you take this role, you will have full independence, no interference. I felt the weight of the moment settle into place, not revenge, not triumph. Alignment, purpose. I accept, I said. Brandon turned away, silenced not by punishment, but by the structure that now existed around him, a structure his own arrogance had made necessary. Brandon was not removed from Rainford Technologies. But for a man who had lived his entire life on inherited authority, the punishment cut far deeper. His name stayed on the organizational chart. His office door remained polished and untouched. Yet everything behind it had been stripped from his control. A title with no authority. A throne with no kingdom. I stepped into my new role as Chief Risk Steward the following week. The first meeting was brief. We will implement transparent approval checkpoints. I told the board, every project above $10 million requires full documentation and verified investor consent. No one objected, not even Richard. As the room emptied, Richard lingered at the doorway. You are leading this company into something stronger than I ever built, he said. His voice carried no pride, only recognition. I should have seen who you were sooner. Seeing it now is enough, I replied. The next few days settled into a new rhythm. I led teams through risk reviews, clarified processes, rebuilt integrity where shortcuts had once been rewarded. People listened when I spoke now, not because I demanded respect, but because I had claimed the place I had earned. Brandon avoided me in the hallways. If we crossed paths, he looked down, shoulders tight. No excuses, no attempts to repair what he had broken, only silence. And in that silence lived the first honest thing he had ever offered me. During a strategy session, Daniel leaned toward me. This company is different with you steering the guardrails. We all needed different, I said. That night, I stood by the window of my apartment overlooking the dark water. The city hummed below, steady and indifferent. One message pull all funding had felt like a detonation at the time. But standing there now, I understood it had been something else entirely. It was liberation. I no longer lived behind the scenes of other people's decisions. I no longer financed the arrogance of men who believed competence was optional if they were born in the right family. What I built stood on my own choices now. And the life lesson I carried with me was simple. Power is not something you wait to be given. Power is something you reclaim the moment you stop funding the people who diminish you.